Sometimes a story is so compelling that it just pops out of the pages of a book at you, and it makes you really want to learn a little bit more about someone. I came into a story like that when I was at Little Round Top in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and I was doing a video out there from my YouTube channel, History with Waffles, and learned a little bit more about a young man that ended up losing his life after his own premonition of that death. Lucius Sherman Larabee was a young officer in the 44th New York Infantry by the time Gettysburg happened. And in 1859, he decided that he was going to join the United States Zouaves Cadets. It was a militia company that gained national recognition for its Zouave style, if you will. They paraded in precision. They put on pretty much a show everywhere they went, and their uniforms could not be mistaken. Its founder and commander, the charismatic Colonel Ellsworth, took Larabee and his comrades on a whirlwind tour of northern cities in 1860, dazzling audiences all along the way. Larabee would come up in a lifestyle that wasn't exactly settled down. He was a bit of a nomad. When he was a young child, he lost his parents, and then he would end up moving around at the age of 3 years old, and then at 11 he would move in with an older sister, and then several years later, at the age of 15, he moves out west of Chicago. This is how he ends up in the place to be able to be in the Zouaves. Larabee followed Ellsworth's star after the nation plunged into the Civil War, and in May of 1861 he joined Ellsworth's newly organized 11th New York Infantry as a first lieutenant. Before the end of the month, Ellsworth suffered a death after he hauled down a rebel flag from the inn in Alexandria, Virginia. Now, if you don't know anything about that particular instance, it's said to be one of the first, if not the first, death in the American Civil War. Ellsworth sees a rebel flag being hoisted above this house, essentially, which is a hotel, and he demands to go up top and take that flag down, which is exactly what he does. He climbs to the top of the stairs, he ends up pulling down that flag, and just as he comes down, the owner of that building is waiting for him at the bottom with a shotgun, and he lets loose and blasts Ellsworth right in the chest. Well, as a result, that made national news, and everybody heard about that. And it was kind of the shocking point to, those soldiers that were there at the time. Oh man, there's actual death involved in this. Later on, Ellsworth's death would end up inspiring the People's Ellsworth Regiment, which was essentially the 11th folding into what would become the 44th New York. Larabee proved to be an able officer in numerous battles in the 44th New York. He ended up joining Company B with the same rank that he held in the 11th. And then eventually, he would end up finding his way to the Army of the Potomac and including the Second Bull Run, where he suffered a wound. At Gettysburg, Larabee would come into this fight with a bit of a premonition about his own life, and he wasn't feeling too good about it. When they get out there close to where the field is, Larabee turns to a couple of his partners there, and he tells them, "Since our last battle, I have known that I would be killed the next time I was under fire." And he's standing there with these other officers around him, Captain William R. Bourne, Benjamin K. Kimberly, and they assured him cheerfully, "Come on, Lucius, it's okay. We're all close to death on these fields. You don't need to hand us your items to send back home. You're going to be okay." But for some reason, Lucius wasn't so confident like those other officers there. He had that kind of feeling in his gut that he needed to send the most important things that he had back home. And so he would end up reaching out to a quartermaster who would take sympathy on his plight and then would give him the opportunity to essentially leave his things with him so that they could be sent back home. Now, if you've never been out to Gettysburg, it's a lot different in person than it is from reading a book or watching a movie, for example. When you watch the movie Gettysburg, which is about the book Killer Angels, everything looks very compact. It's all jammed together in one place, and it's almost as if you can see the lines of men from one side to the next, and everything's perfect. But it's not that way. I remember the first time I went out to Gettysburg, and I crossed into that very first, I guess, territorial footing of the national park, where you start to come up over the ridge, and you see John Buford on horseback, and you see the monuments, and you see the picket fences and all that stuff, and all of a sudden, your gut starts to get butterflies. You're seeing the edges of the township of Gettysburg for the first time, and really, you're in a hurry to try to take it all in as quickly as you possibly can. But I'm here to tell you, it's not something that you can do so fast. So, when I got out to Gettysburg for the first time and ended up in Little Round Top, my mindset was this was some huge hill that these men were charging up and down all day long. Well, when you get out there, you start to notice that's not even true. Although it is a hill, and there are a lot of rocks on that hill, and it looks daunting even from the bottom looking up. It's just not quite as large as Hollywood makes it out to be. But when you go up to the position where the 44th New York was stationed at the top of Little Round Top there in Gettysburg, then you get a real sense of what their purpose was in that fight, especially standing on top of that monument. You look down and you realize where the Confederate soldiers were coming from. It almost feels like you are being enveloped by the Confederate units that are coming towards you. It feels like they're coming from the side, the rear, straight on the front, and of course you have soldiers wrapped around in your position. And if you look at a battle map, that perfect little fish hook isn't exactly a good representation of the positions that are there on Little Round Top. With the 20th Maine anchoring off to your left-hand side if you're standing at Little Round Top, and you're in the position of the 44th New York, the 20th Maine not only anchors that line, but the 20th Maine also kind of wraps around behind a little bit in order to refuse the line. So 44th New York, standing on top, has a perfect bird's eye view of everything that's going on in front of them. And they're stationed down a little bit further too, because remember, in this battle, the military position to fall back to is this rocky ridge. and that's where they're supposed to go when they are in trouble. And eventually they end up fighting from that rocky ridge. Well, Larabee is out there on that ridge line, out on the corner, and he's able to look down from his position and realizes he's about to go into the fight. And after all of this confusion and stuff that was going on with Larabee, he decides to turn to his partners there and basically say his salutations. And one of the men tell him good luck. And he turns around to them and says, "Goodbye. I shall see you no more." And with those words, he marches off into the Battle of Gettysburg with his unit. "Goodbye, Billy. I shall see you no more." That was Larabee's fateful word. With that, his men would be deployed forward as skirmishers from the main line there at Little Round Top. He gets into the action about 200 yards out from his position, and as he gets there, a bullet strikes and hits him true, and it kills Larabee right there on that battlefield. But his unit's not able to get out there and pull him off the field just yet. The very next day, the soldiers are combing the field and looking for survivors and men that they can help. And they go out there, roughly where the skirmish line started, and there's Larabee's body laying on the ground. They pull him from the ground, they bring him back behind the lines, and then they ship his body off as best they can to be buried in Chicago the next day. That ends the story of Larabee and his premonition there in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. If you get the chance to go out to Gettysburg, I highly recommend you go to Little Round Top and you find that 44th New York Infantry monument. And you kind of stand there in that position and think to yourself, what would I do if I really felt like this was my last chance? If I felt like this was the moment that I was going to die, standing here. I was so convinced that I needed to send back my watch, my valuables, and anything on me that I thought my family needed in order to tell them goodbye. What would you do? It takes a lot of dedication, it takes a lot of guts and bravery to stand in there and face that situation. And maybe he's wrong. Maybe he goes into the fight, and maybe he makes it out of that fight. And how many times before that did Larabee end up having a premonition about his own death? Lots of men going into battle have premonitions of their own death, and a lot of them end up being wrong. But for Lucius, his came true, and it ended there in 1863 on a hot July afternoon in a place called Little Round Top.